A couple of things to note on the way through here is our issues in the river with wood waste are not just slash, there's a whole lot of whole trees where mature slopes have moved. And the other thing is the build up of the material in the river like this one. We've got metres of material built up in a lot of our waterways, particularly in the Waipu catchment inland from Ruatoria. So they're issues we're having to fight with at the moment. So we've got a few photos to just go through just to show you what we're having to contend with, and then we've got 4 or 5 scenes at the end. We just want to get some feedback on are we doing it right and any good ideas on how we might go through into the future. So
yeah, this is just some images of what happened after this gully was already present before the cyclone, but reinitiated with the cyclones, and the slip blocked the river. It's called the Wairongamai River, and they were assessing it for risk to downstream, but it's just now chewing down, and they're just letting it do its thing. And this is just north of Tokomaru Bay. It's called the Mangahoini Gorge, and this blocked the river, and then the river ended up on the road. So it's beyond anything. There was plantation forestry, but beyond anything that we could have done. And this is just looking up into that. And obviously everyone's seen photos of the woody debris on rivers and what's the effect on farmland downstream, so maize headache, and just the amount of woody material on the rivers.
So our woody material here is a mix of slash material, but also a lot of whole trees, the root bowl still on them that's come off slopes or pieces of riverbank that have been captured by the event. We've also got quite a lot of poplar and willow in there, material that's got too big, hasn't been maintained over time. Not a problem with plantings in the hill country, but beside rivers, those trees have got too big. We need them 80% below ground and just a small stub above. We've got it opposite way around, so they all tumble into the river when riverbank erosion occurs.
Another question.
Mm.
When you say that's more river planting of poles or trees by that stage. What size river are you talking about? Like, so up in the hill country, you're seeing a lot of poles coming down.
Oh no, we're not in that. We've got 3 or 4. So the Tiarawhiti at Gisborne with the waterworks upstream.
Yeah.
That's bad down on the flat. So it's where it goes through alluvial flats. So that's one. Toliga Bay's really bad, and parts of the Waimata. But it's you could take it out on land that with the riverbank it joins classes 1 to 4. It's better alluvial flats, and these trees have got too big down there. Once you get into the hill country, 1, they don't tend to move because the gullies and waterways aren't big enough, and 2, they haven't got so big as to tumble in. There's no room for them to tumble into a waterway. We're getting big effects where the waterway that gets filled up before it cuts around the outside bend, and the trees are so big that they topple in. It's they're quite distinct issues, eh?
That's probably a good example because that's poplar and willow there, and this is close to the Hangaroa River that lost how many bridges? Kerry?
2 or 3 bridges lost in a catchment with very little harvesting going on.
So yeah, it's just to show that we've been here before. This is Cyclone Bola and post Hale and Gabrielle, and it's just noting the change in land use that has happened in parts, like some forestry blocks, some more riparian buffers, and poplar and willow, but it's probably not enough for that type of country.
So we'll come back to this. What do we do with that now? So that fell out in Cyclone Bola. This is the scenes we had because it wasn't a great deal of plantation forestry on a lot of this land, but it was seen as the answer. So once the early 90s came along, there's blanket afforestation on all of this. They plant every square inch of that. So we'll come back to that photo a bit later on. So that's 1988. This is upstream of Gisborne City. So the two big bridges in the city are at the mercy of what happens in here and adjoining bits of forestry. So what do we do with that in the future? So we're right down to bedrock there. This is a second rotation. I always talk about the window of vulnerability. They always just say 0 through to about 7 or 8 years. These are 10 years old. So, and we have areas of 25-year-old trees where the whole slope's moved in 1 or 2 of these events. So that vulnerability thing is, we're re-looking at where that'll be. So, yeah, what does everyone think of where the plantation species should be on there? What we could have done or should have done in that gully, bearing in mind there's no incentives to do anything in there at all at the time. The incentive available to this site was blanket afforestation with plantation seedlings and nothing else.
Question on some of those big slopes, established radiata, I assume, that's gone. Do you believe that radiata has contributed to that slope going, or is it a case of that slope is going to go regardless of what you planted on it? Having trees there didn't stop at this time, and it's probably contributed to bigger issues downstream, but it was going to go regardless.
So there's two things there. We get back into our older Cretaceous material in the hill country. Those trees are fine. We don't get this slip erosion on that so much. There's a lot of rock in the soil profile. There's thicker soils, and those trees do quite nicely. We never ever had slash problems on some of those forests. Our first 20 years after Bola, we had kind conditions, and a lot of the forest was the crown forests were harvested on easier sloping land. Once you get out onto the younger sediments that are very slip prone out towards Toliga, what you're saying is actually right. And once the weight, so once you get trees that are more than 30 years old, the increase in weight is a real problem.
Are there any established native of whatever age, be that 50-year native or be that 10-year native?
Yeah, we're coming up. We've got one. We've got something coming up. Yeah. So yeah, what do we do in that gully system there? But that was the incentive. Now this is something we really like because this was our bread and butter way back. Cyclone Bola, the incentives to do that disappeared. Poplar and willow, there's quite a few thousand trees in there. Probably can guarantee they're all post 1990, so they could be collecting carbon off all of that. The big plus for that is no one's ever going to harvest it, so we're not going to have logging trucks on roads, we're not going to have all the disturbance. We do need to maintain that over time, so those trees, if we just leave them, they will get too big. But not too far from here, anyone that was at our conference 2013, we went up to an area where a local farmer cuts the tops out of those trees for feed in a dry autumn. And the alternative for him is to bring in feed or sell stock. He can keep them all there on highly nutritious poplar and willow, and the feed is just growing in the paddock. He doesn't have to transport it in or anything. So we see that as a real success going forward. We'll come back to that towards the end. So this is the photo on the left is radiata has been planted with poplar and willow already in the paddock. So that's real success for us, but the poplar and willow was in the gully when the radiata was planted. If you try and do that all at once, the poplar and willow gets suppressed by the plantation species. That was harvested in about 4 years ago, and the one on the right is post-harvest. We haven't required the radiata to go back, the plantation trees to go back as part of a consent, because we always believed the poplar and willow were doing the trick. Now, in all the recent events we've had, the floodgate at the bottom of that has remained intact, so the poplar and willow has stopped any slash. It's not that steep to generate slash in any case, but the finger was pointed at the landowner. All the slash in Tokomara Bay must have come from here, but these floodgates intact, nothing came through it, so very easy to defend him. But you do wonder why that area was ever planted in plantation seedlings, the piece on the left, when the other the other species doing the trick. This comes back to your question about indigenous regrowth. So 1988, this was like the craters of the moon in there. In our region we have what's called Land Overlay 3A. People are required to establish vegetation on that really highly erosion prone land. At the time, early after Bola, when the incentives came in, their opportunity there was plantation seedlings, and then we had what was called managed reversion, and so this landowner got stuck in. They were getting good returns for Manuka honey at the time, and as you can see from the photo on the left, other than the piece of vegetation right down on the river, this was pretty bare. They would be collecting pretty good carbon credits even though it's indigenous right now. So that's managed reversion. I took that photo out of the helicopter just earlier this year, hardly a movement in it, and it's only it's probably only about 25 years old. So the future there should improve out of sight. That stuff's really honking along now, it's growing quite quickly. And so there's one of the answers. We see that as highly successful. Well, I suspect we'd had 25-year-old radiata on there. Once they get older, they can be slipping into the river. That's a big outside bend on there. So that vegetation, and it's 100% eco-source because it's reversion. The big push on there was to get rid of the goats. When I first went to Gisborne, they were farming goats on this. And part of the East Cape Catchment Board, we tried to get them to have to just not allow them to continue. If they went out of farming goats, they wanted to destroy them. It wasn't the appetite politically to do that at the time. So there's a lot of effort went into controlling the goats on this, but it's working really nicely. Yeah, and that's bad erosion. So that indigenous is doing the trick, because there was a heap of rain on this in the two events we had earlier this year. Yeah.
Any erosion on the river there?
Pretty amazing, actually. In other parts we had incredible erosion on the banks. Now, whether that is to do with that it gets really wet and the weight above it sets that off with the bigger trees, don't really know. Something we need to look at really, really closely. Once again, we've got poplar and willow grown in that gully there. This is a carbon block. We anticipate someone will want to harvest that in time. Without the planting in there, that would be quite problematic, but that gully planting is securing the land, protecting the associated slopes, but it's also, if we ever got slashed, it wouldn't get any further than the gully system there. So why we ever moved away from planting the gullies, not sure, but the incentives just disappeared on us. Now that's an aerial of those areas in there. So as you can see, we've still got some great big gullies that are class 8 that are really difficult to control. Our task is to try and prevent too much more land getting like that. So planting the headwaters of that. So these are the dilemmas we're into. Post-Cyclone Bola, the big incentives were for regional development and erosion control. Was that right? Was that the right driver we got from the government incentives? And was the policy direction and funding, has that served us well? Because we moved away from poplar and willows to blanket afforestation after Cyclone Bola. That was seen as the answer. What innovations were available, and you've brought up one with the reversions, good one. Some of the alternative species at Copus are good alternatives, and we've got some very good examples where that's worked. And they were as solid as a drum in these events. Some of that we didn't get the erosion. Melanoxylon and one or two of the forest land from Ruatori has held on really nicely, even right down in the gullies. Pretty impressive.
Is that planting just in the gullies or full forests?
The Forest Service used to plant 10% alternative species, and in one of the Ruatoria forests they plant a whole lot of acacia right down to the waterways. See what that went like, and it's really cool, quite tight. Yeah. So what areas of our farms and forests should we have a long-term sustainable land use? What land use change is required, and how are we going to achieve that? And then what forests can be harvested safely? And Guy with forestry background in the first crew said, well, there's a lot of problems in harvesting this. We get onto mechanical harvesting, but those machines dig in quite deep on a lot of this hill country. So we're looking right now at a plan change that's going to identify land that shouldn't be clearfield harvested. And yeah, we run into a few issues with that, because it's, you know, that's saying you can't clearfield harvest it into the future. And once that's in place, it's going to be really hard to change. We've got to get that very right.
Almost 25-year-old forest that's up for harvest in 3 years, big income.
That's right. Probably we allow it to happen once, but not again. So there's a certain amount of, you know, feeling that we should allow it to be taken once, providing we get stuck in and have it revert or have it in long-term species next time around. Yep, that's where we want it to go. Yep. So moving on, we go back to these photos, and we get that right. So the incentives at the time would have been to plant everything in near and plantation seedlings. Now, we had a former workmate of mine said, so that's an aerial view of that site, and just going on again. So that's what that's like now. So we never get on top of those couple of Class 8 gullies. They are, like in the winter months, you just go knee deep in the mud in there. And then in the summer, it dries out like concrete. So really problematic. So we've got big, wide riparians, and we see that that's been really successful. The fast-growing plantation species have slowed down the runoff rates and given the indigenous a chance to get away. So we want to know what we do with that now. So this is getting towards the end of rotation one of the, we could look at harvesting. People are looking at harvesting it now. Bear in mind that those trees are on reasonably stable slopes where we've got plantation trees, so they're good wood. The other stuff, the indigenous would have moved. There'd be a lot of hockey stick trees. There'd be a lot of gaps, a lot of branches. What we've got here is probably quite valuable wood. But the other problem with this is it's 150 k's from town. It's a long way out, and the prices are pretty awful at the moment. Access into here is not too bad. We can get in on the ridges. Don't have to use the riverbed. So what do we do with that now, or next time round? As a council, should we be allowing them to replant that once they've harvested it?
Put back into native for carbon.
Could do. Now, everyone's sort of wondering where we go to with liabilities in terms of going down that path. One thing that would happen in here, that land reverts so quick, like it's as good as a rainforest, eh? Yep. So reversion on here would be ideal, because cut over reverts really nicely in this country. Yep. So that is one option, and that is probably quite realistic with the distance from town and what the harvesting costs will be.
How do you control the sediment between harvest and regen? I mean, can you help it along the way by planting manuka either side of manuka?
The best thing we can do on this is not harvest it all at once. So that piece there, it's got like an eye in it. If we harvested that in about 3 lots, that would be the best bet. But planting any species on here is, other than radiata, like there's Douglas fir on the top there, and it's just been a disaster with the feral animals. So reversion, a lot of ferals don't worry reversion as it grows. If they go to, they'll chase planted manuka. Yeah, so that would be a good option. But we wouldn't have too many problems other than right alongside the river of that being going back into radiata again, as long as it's harvested really carefully. It's not that steep, the stuff in radiata there. Yeah. So does anyone think that we should just have it in permanent indigenous over time?
A couple of suggestions. I was just sort of wondering whether you went for a high return species like redwood that coppices.
Yep.
How does, because the distance report, because it's high value.
Yep.
And also the fact that it coppices means that the roots are still in the ground, and
Yep.
it has that. How does that go, given the weight of a redwood?
Yep.
On those hill slopes?
So those slopes there are not that steep. Where the indigenous is, it's really steep. So redwood or acacia would go really well. We're talking quite a bit about acacia melanoxylon. What forestry people are saying about that is, with a lot more research to getting the form of those trees together, they could well be an answer going forward. But yeah,
Dry too.
yeah. But they have gone really well in a lot of sites here. Like, this is pretty wet, but upstream of here, wetter again, acacia melanoxylon's gone really nicely. But the copacine aspect and the fact you don't harvest them that often, and they are slower grown, so you only harvest them once every 50 or 80 years. Real advantages in that. It's the...
Establishment would be a problem.
Well, that's it, eh? Yeah. But people are certainly looking at that. A melanoxylon on our country has been really cool in some earth flow areas. Grows a lot better than radiata does on wet ground. And if the ground moves, it just moves with it. The radiata dies. So some of the alternatives may be the answer.
What about end use?
Beg pardon?
What's the end use for them?
Yeah, well, we're talking cross purposes with forestry. We're saying melanoxylon's there as a conservation plant. We don't care what form it's like. It's we want to get the ground covered. But if there could be an alternative where it was worth a lot and we only harvested it in coops as a result of that, there's some real advantages in going down that path. So there's always looked at trying to keep people's options open, and with a high producing species like that, we may go down that path. Yep.
Just in some of these sites where they've been harvested and perhaps not owned by a big forestry company, are you seeing much change in landowner kind of interest in whether it's replanted in production in pine or alternative species or natural reversion? Have you noticed a bit of a change in landowner?
Oh, there's certainly, people are looking getting out of that real marginal stuff. Like land that shouldn't have gone into trees, and that's what this plan change we're working towards at the moment will move away from that. But yeah, we used to have this saying, if you buy 1,000 hectares, you've got to plant every square inch. That's long gone. So people are not going to riparian areas like they used to. Been really interesting, when the NES came in 2018, I went out with a company with a guy whose background was harvest planning and the other one was establishment, and I thought it'll be council versus them. It wasn't. It was the harvest planner and I, very much in line with what could safely be harvested down the track. So there, the attitudes changed dramatically. So what do we do with this? So that's what greeted us in Cyclone Bola. We had thousands of hectares like this, and it all got planted at 1,250 or 1,500 stems per hectare Pinus radiata, nothing else. We weren't that thrilled with that at the time, but that was the incentive, and there was no consent requirements in terms of afforestation. It was for harvesting down the track, but they're already in the ground then. So what do we do with that? Bearing in mind that that gully there is so active. So if you're putting in a valuable species, your chances of losing it are very high. Yeah, well, reversion is, yeah. We're looking at legumes in places, so perhaps oversowing some legumes. And most of the research I found when I first went to Gisborne, there was a lot of research being done on legumes, and as soon as they weren't passing the test of whether they were grazable or not, they got kicked for touch. We're not actually interested in whether they're grazable or not in there. If we control the feral animals and they can grow, they could be really advantageous. So we'll have a fresh look at what legumes might go really well. There are one or two legumes and a couple of fibrous rooted grass species that could be really take off in this. And planted manuka too is, seeding of manuka. We're having another close look at that. So yeah, where's the boundary for planting radiata on that? Where do you go to? Yeah. Is anyone from Otago? The plan change is just putting some big setbacks on radiata?
Yeah, it's a pre-public consultation. This is our direction, I think, thing from the council. I'm not from the council. But yeah, they've got pretty setbacks in some places.
Yep. Yeah. So did we get that one right? Bearing in mind that we've got perfect evidence that That's all post 1990. About 95% of it is post 1990. That's now 35 years old, so the carbon credits must be accruing quite significantly on that. Plus, if we get some increased returns from Manuka honey, this site would be quite incredible.
The thing about that previous slide too is that it's a reasonably easy decision, I'll say easy decision, because it's not like you're going to make money doing anything else. You know, you can't make money grazing there.
Yep.
So everybody, I mean, it's clearly been grazed previously, but I would have thought that the landowner would be fully on board of taking that out of grazing. And it'll just come down to how do we hold it together as best as possible.
Yep.
And if you happen to be able to make some carbon money out of it, awesome.
Yep, that's quite right. So,
Would it still be worth putting poplars in there?
yeah, well, over time, see, we've always had the philosophy too that poplars and willows in gullies are really helpful, but always delay that till the species are around at 4 or 5 years old. So plant them with sleeves, with protection, and you're getting some runoff control in, but your losses can still be pretty dramatic. But you know, we never know. Like Cyclone Bola, everyone was saying we were in a phase like we're in now, where these things are just going to keep coming, well, you know, really close annually. We had about 15 to 20 years where we had hardly a significant rain in the whole district. Now, I think our chances of that now aren't great, but if that does happen, trying that out has given us some big benefits. Yeah. But it's one of those things you just keep plugging away. Forest Service days, you know, they'd plant a big area, quite a bit of erosion-prone land, and there'd be some losses in there on the erosion-prone stuff, and they'd go back and blank that. They might plant it 3 or 4 times. In the days of commercial forestry, it gets planted once, and if it moves, you only pick that up once a rotation. Yeah, so we need to go back to that. It's expensive and it's high risk, but that's perhaps the only answer. Yeah. And we need to follow that acacia, like in some of our gully systems, that's worked a treat.
Is that, because pressure for that sort of work is likely to have to come from regional councils in terms of consent conditions to require going back through and blanking at additional cost.
Yep.
Because the industry is unlikely to pick that up as standard practice because it won't make money.
Yep, so you know, I was involved in conditions when we first did that for resource consents, and we had that you had to establish something, not just plant it. There's a huge difference, and it hasn't been monitored that well. The other thing, the NES does say that a council can control the timing, the location, and the species. That's a huge advantage that I don't know that we've made the most of either. Yeah.
I was just wondering as well whether if you do have got that control over which species are planted, could you, if an application for plantation came in, could you insist on a 50-50 pine eucalypt mix? So they both harvest, you know, they harvest at the same time, but the eucalypts coppice to provide that quick win following harvest.
On the second next rotation. So we've looked at that in the past, and what we've found is radiata totally suppresses the other species. With melanoxylon, they have survived, and so when that harvesting occurs, they come back. But what we've found with eucalyptus, and there may be some varieties of eucalyptus that do withstand it.
Yeah, I think so, because in Nelson, there's, but I mean, it's a different region, I understand, but I think, the drylands eucalypts have done quite a bit of genetics on that.
Yeah, well, you're in a really good position where Paul's been doing that. He's done some up our way, but not the extent he would have done with you guys. But what you've got to watch with that, insisting on alternative species, is if they fail for any reason, you get the big event and they've spent $20,000 a hectare as opposed to 2 with radiata, you've been responsible for that. And the pest control is significantly more. That's not our problem, but it is. And if they don't do it, there's a problem there. And they are slower growing. So In a lot of cases, radiata that could be thinned over time back to indigenous and transition, and people are looking at that, is actually quite a good opportunity. Yeah.
How well does native establish under your? Because I've seen massive differences across regions
Yep.
and climates
Yep.
in terms of the understory you wind up with in some of these monoculture
Yep.
forestry crops. What's it like in these areas?
So I've seen in some of our inland areas we get a high rainfall. You walk around in there just before pine trees are harvested, and the understory is incredible. And you know that when they fell that, you're going to lose about 20% of it, but when they extract it, they're going to knock the rest. So some form of silviculture of getting rid of those radiata trees, like thinning them back to nil. No one's been down that path, but I'm sure with the amount of understory you see coming through, there is a big opportunity to follow through on that. If you were able to thin those remaining radiata out sort of 100 stems every 5 or 6 years, over time you've got a totally indigenous block there, and there's probably enough species to suppress the wildings as well. Wildings are a huge problem in our region. Yeah, like wildings could be an issue on that ridge there. Yeah.
Is there the infrastructure in terms of forestry companies and harvest equipment to be able to, I'll say selectively harvest, but what I mean is like taking stripes out, like you say. If you went, right, we're going to harvest it over the next 20 years, you're going to take stripe out this year, then in 5 years' time you're going to take some more stripes out, and you're going to take some more stripes out.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you were involved in this, some webinars earlier in the year on continuous carbon. And the thing that struck me about that, people were doing exactly that, and the steeper you get, the tougher it gets. And I think some of this would be just too tough. Yeah. But yeah, really neat concept if you could do that. But even on, you get onto strongly rolling, moderately steep slopes, you'd be really struggling. Yeah. Yep.
Have we finished with this one?
Yep. And so that's 1989 photography. We've got that all over the region, so that's invaluable in terms of what we had there in 1990 in terms of carbon.
Thanks, Bola.
Yeah, that's one of the few good things about it. We've got this magnificent coverage. Yeah, so but Mānuka has helped that site no end. So yeah, what do we do with this now? 10. So what do we do with this one now? So those trees are a second rotation. They're about 8 to 10 years old. And we've got a company that's finding it pretty difficult in terms of just where the log prices are at the moment. And so what are we going to do with that into the long term? Because I think it might come back our way to how we do deal with it.
What's the rainfall there? Is that high rainfall?
No, might be 1,000 millimetres a year there, but it's had 2,000 this year. So yeah, real steep sandstone, so reasonably recent geologically in our region. No real topsoil left on a lot of that, and very low fertility. That, ironically, that was cleared from scrub pre-RMA to plantation forestry. That's what it looks like from the year. And that's what it looks like with all those slips. So there's a piece in the top here is probably fine. If that's all the estate you've got left, why you're there. Yep.
Got some gaps with Hudson.
Yeah, but we're struggling to, where those slips are, you're right down to bedrock. But our concern here is we've got this incredible slash problem downslope of here. It's taken out a big culvert. There's been guys there stacking up material downslope of this for weeks and then burning that wood waste. To me, it's almost that we chemically thin this stuff over time and just let it revert. But we'll have a real issue with wildings in here. They're going to come away in there like hairs on a dog's back. So
Probably slash in the meantime too, even if you are chemically thinning.
Yep, yep. Interesting thing about doing that is we've seen at times where they've killed trees, sprayed them out, and if they're dead standing a couple of years down the track, they blow over or whatever, and they just do fly apart before they get to the creek. So the slash opportunities fall right off. Yeah. And you've stopped them growing too. Yeah. If they come down live, and quite often they'll break above the ground. If they come down live, all the roots and all come with them, and half the topsoil that they're holding. So spraying them out is actually quite advantageous. But once again, there's no income in that. So a major problem here. And yeah, what do we do with that?
I've sort of read some stuff, and you would know, Kerry, around the 10-year mark where you're thinning, and that sort of changes the forest, the layout of the forest, and you're thinned to waste, and then that provides sort of more saturation of the soil because you've got these gaps.
Yep.
But also around that time, the previous rotations roots are rotting from the last rotation.
Yep.
And so sometimes at around about that 10-year mark, just for that second rotation especially, can be a perfect storm.
Yeah, it's highly vulnerable. You've got all these pores in the ground that water flows into,
Yes.
and you've created big gaps in the tree roots of the previous rotation are well and truly gone. So yeah, you've got exactly what you're saying. Yep. So it's another situation where you say, well, should the second rotation ever be planted? But once again, if you let it revert, when that 10 years comes along, that regenerating vegetation is probably not that big. Yeah. So do we get this right? So that's poplar and willow. That's probably cost as much to do that as it would have to afforest it.
At least this bloke's making money.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. He probably didn't drop his stock numbers too much at all. And he's grazed that basically from the day he planted it. So he hasn't had to wait for a crop of trees for 30 years. The other thing in there, when his woolshed's on the other side of the creek, but if he's shearing, there is a wonderful bit of shelter in there now. So he'll fire all his ewes in there with no wool on. But in the summer, you go out there in the middle of the day, you can hardly see an animal. They're all in under there. And it protects the water in the creeks quite nicely. You have got stock in the nearer the waterways than you might have other times, but we've also found that if you put dams in the upper slopes there, that's far cleaner water, and the stock will go for the cleaner water rather than in the gullies where someone's been tramping up and down where you want to have a drink from. If we've got clean water and dams in the top, stock will tend to go there. Yeah. And we're never going to have, like all that area there, 200 hectares, how many loads of logs go out of there on the road, and how many metal trucks full of metal to come in there, because metal is so short, it has to come from Ruatoria. So the pounding of the road doesn't occur when we've got this. Yep.
If you went back to the start of that, is it possible to, in our day and age, to bring that through as a forestry, as a popular, controlled popular?
Yeah, well you could do that over time. If that became a popular market, these guys would be in business, big time. Yep. The other aspect of this, so one of the people in the early one said it doesn't look that steep, doesn't look that eroding. This is really wet country. This is wet argillite earth flow. The gullies in there were quite bad, and so they've stopped the sediment in there, and it's not as if it gets harvested and you get another influx of sediment coming down there. And no one's ever going to have slash off that site. So we see this as a real advantage. Unfortunately, after Bola, the incentives to do this fell right off. Went to, they would have afforested that overnight. That would have, anyone applied to afforest that, it would have just happened. So it's that country there. It's quite broken in places, and it is wet. So what you get in terms of some forestry species on that is not that great. They can be pretty stunted or a lot of hockey sticks.
How much country out there is that appropriate?
We time?
Just about.
Yep, cool. Yep.
How much country out there is that appropriate for? Because, you know, it's got to be not quite bad enough if you've got a horrific existing gullying so that you can get...
Yeah, that's right. You don't go to pole planting on those real Class 8 sites, but you don't go to forestry either now.
No.
That's the thing we've learnt. So they need to revert somehow. Yep.
And is it sort of, from your perspective, is it a reasonably clear, there's a wiggly line there and everything above that line is just manage it into reversion?
Yep.
And
Yep.
then
So that's what we're trying to...
below that there's the slot of
Yep.
effectively that, and then potentially below that is some of the forestry land that's less prone to erosion.
That's right.
than
Yep. Yep. So you don't grow poles on badly eroding land. That's more appropriate to plantation and forestry in places. But it's in the gullies we need to retire them. So what do we do with this? So this is, someone's gone ahead and planted that in good faith. He's had an incentive to plant it. If we were going to harvest that now, what would we allow him to harvest, or what would we, more importantly, would allow him to replant? So anyone have a go at where we draw the boundary?
Halfway down the slope, or halfway through that forestry block on the left-hand side, maybe the top bit you put trees in, the bottom half's going to... Oh no, sorry. Oh,
The top one?
Possibly up the top there, you can still go trees.
Yep.
But much of that's just going to have to be reversion. Hard to tell here.
Yep.
That's all going to have to probably be reversion because it looks like the stuff slipped out of that.
Yep.
All of that's going to be the same deal. Unsure about that. It's hard
Yep.
to tell. It could go either way.
Yep. So you picked up on something really interesting there, that the trees tell you where you're going to get a good result. So if you get it all closed in like that, that stuff's fine. But this around here, they're telling you that there's been quite a bit of movement, been quite a lot. That wood will be rubbish in comparison to that. Be a lot of branches, there'll be a lot of twisted trunks and hockey sticks, and you're probably costing you money to harvest it, so why bother? And you'll make money out of that. I suspect if you harvested everything in there, we'd probably allow people to take the lot, but not replant other than that area. I'd expect on there, if you had planted that in the first, that's all you'd planted, you'd make good money out of that. The rest of it, you make a loss, you might just break even on the whole thing. So some big advantages in only planting the good stuff at the start and letting the rest revert.
The rest of it being reversion leads and this carbon money.
Yep.
Nobody saw that.
That isn't after the event. But that's not to say that there still could be a future with carbon on some of that. But what we're wanting to happen is if there is liability on that, if they don't replant it, we'll get rid of the liability on the basis they do manage a reversion. We see that as a really good alternative. I think...
You're restricting the best areas you're incentivising distributed.
Yep. Yeah, you're going to have a lot better timber off there.
Yeah.
And so the truckload of junk going to town doesn't happen that's wrecking the roads. So yeah, you're improving everything. No end. I think everyone's moving. Oh, thanks very much.
Thank you.